Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy day to join the Threat Intelligence User Group here for APAC. What we're going to cover today is about using threat intelligence as part of your vulnerability management process and how it can complement that and help you achieve better outcomes. So the agenda that I'm going to cover today is around some of the vulnerability management challenges, and those that have been or are doing this role or have done it in the past will know these. Why threat intelligence, and then bringing it all together and how we can make it work for you. This isn't a my way is the right way. It's just here to help you come up with ideas on how best you can use threat intelligence within your organization to help improve vulnerability management, because it is an extremely challenging part of the of security and IT in general. So who am I? My name's Tim Peters. I've been around for a long time. Get a lot more grey hairs than what I used to have. I'm a threat intelligence engineer for a company called Threat Quotient. Threat Quotient make a threat intelligence platform. I've been with them for about 8 months or 9 months now, but have been around. I've run security operations for companies like Accenture, worked in critical infrastructure, and done consulting and things. So I'm a bit of a security nerd. And because I'm old, I tend to shout at clouds, and you'll see me rant sometimes about silly stuff. So wanted to sort of start off by sort of taking you through some of the challenges and why you can use threat intelligence potentially to help complement your existing processes. So if we take a look back at the history of things, in the late 90s, the introduction of commercial vulnerability management tools were released. They came to market. In the early noughties, we started to see regulatory bodies start to implement or sort of requiring businesses to have a patch management policy and procedures in place, and to respond back to vulnerabilities that were disclosed or came to light. Things like PCI DSS was one of the first ones to sort of make sure that organizations complied with that. Then we started to see some of the introduction of compensating controls that could help mitigate some of the vulnerabilities. Your IDS and IPS with signatures, WAFs and firewalls and the like. Passive scanning was introduced there as well. And then we started to look at, next-gen firewalls started to have capabilities to protect and mitigate against some of these threats. And then there's continuous monitoring of agents on endpoint devices as such. And now we're seeing a lot of adoption of SaaS. Cloud has taken off, and that's shifted responsibilities of who is responsible for vulnerability management in certain areas. Threat intelligence has been focused on threat campaigns and motivations and techniques. But now with remote working, the perimeter has moved. So we can bring all of this together to help achieve better outcomes. So with all of that going on, there's lots happened over the last 20 odd years. The technology stack and being able to, have complete visibility of your entire infrastructure is very challenging. Certainly, from my experiences working in critical infrastructure and in organizations, knowing what you have, where it's located and what it's made up of is quite challenging. We also have the challenge of limited resources. That ends up being with what gets prioritized, what gets deprioritized, and sometimes tasks can never get completed because really we just don't. There's not enough hours in the day, and there's not enough people to go around. Software supply chain has been quite big, and it's still not fully understood. If you took a look at things like the Log4j type that we saw a couple of years ago now, that sort of created a panic and sparked a lot of people to go, okay, well, what is in our technology stack that we're using that could lead us to vulnerability? Are we looking at how many vendors' software development lifecycle? Are they implementing, embedding security in the development? We've got compliance burdens. Those who have done ISM and IRAP assessments know what that's about. Same as PCI DSS. The mandates the speed of identifying vulnerabilities, as well as mitigating those. So I think recall back with ISM, it's critical vulnerabilities within 48 hours. So you've trying to stay on top of that, and then when we have limited resources, it just gets harder and harder. And then when business priorities change, they sometimes outweigh security priorities, and that can lead to business critical systems not being able to be remediated in a timely manner, or we have to try and find compensating controls to try and restrict some of the access or exposure of that particular asset. So it's not an easy job, and it's getting even more challenging as we move towards building a lot of applications within our organization as well. And what are those components and what are the risks in there from that perspective? And when we look at risk and generally think that that's risk and compliance type, it's not for the technical people, but really risk is about is part of every organization. And when we look at risk, it's as the example here is likelihood of the event multiplied by the impact of the consequences. So, how do you work that out, and what is the impact? What is the impact to the business? We know generally speaking, we know from a technology perspective what that impact is, but how does that translate back to the business, and how does that then fit into within the organization's risk appetite? So it can be a very complex and difficult thing to sort of manage and maintain. So when you look at a vulnerability, where we look at things like, is the vulnerable asset accessible to unauthenticated users? If it is, then that's going to flag. That's a red flag straight away. Is it directly accessible via the internet? How many of these assets do we have that are exposed to this vulnerability? So trying to stay on top of that is difficult. But then getting into the nitty gritty of, well, what's involved to actually exploit the asset? We understand what the vulnerability is there. It's quite well documented. But when we start to think from a threat actor's perspective, what does it take to actually exploit this particular vulnerability and that asset? And then what controls do we have in place? Sometimes that we do have controls, or mitigating controls that we have that can either prevent or detect. Let's talk about with WAFs and IDS, IPS signatures and things like that, that can sort of help and buy us time to try and then stay on top of things. So the question is, why use threat intelligence? So, why? And from my perspective, it's about threat intelligence can provide the context, and the context, in my opinion, is everything. When we have a clearer picture about what is happening, we can make better and more informed decisions. So, questions that threat intelligence can answer for us is, is there an active exploit being used by the threat actors? Does the threat actor need to develop their own exploit, or can they use off-the-shelf tools like Cobalt Strike or Metasploit, or any other tools that are available? Does it fit into the threat actor's, PTP? If you're tracking certain threat actors, that are, potentially target your industry or your organization, then, would this particular vulnerability fit into their current, motive and process that they follow? If not, then they have to go and change the way that they do things. When we get back, how complex is it to execute? How can you go from a vulnerability to an exploit? Does it require the need to go through and start up a phishing campaign, or is that asset accessible directly from the internet, where you can then, it could be a SQL injection, could be cross-site scripting, and then pivot and lateral movement through the organization's network to get to the objective that they're trying to achieve. Threat intelligence can give you if there's any evidence that they're targeting similar companies. And then industry peers sharing intelligence. If you're not already involved, look to get involved in the JCSC Slack group, where they share indicators. If you're not already signed up to the CTIS program here in Australia, then that they share, CTIS can share intelligence with you. So and that's coming back, a lot of it is coming back from organizations within Australia that they're providing CTIS that are then sending back to other organizations to make them aware. So that's where really I believe that threat intelligence provides that context and gives you a clearer picture about what is going on.
Here's what I found.
Okay, thank you, Siri. So if you look at the vulnerability management cycle, and this is what I've grabbed from Gartner. It's got, we assess, prioritize, act, reassess, and improve. So always continuous improvement. And where I think that threat intelligence can help is around gauging exposure, adding threat context, mitigating with any known indicators that you have, but also, accepting the risk. If it falls within the risk appetite of the organization, then sometimes it's okay to accept the risk. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it will fall out of that, and therefore that you'll need to make actionable decisions that to patch a particular system, whether it's a business critical system or in the instance where we've had, when looking after critical infrastructure, the energy management system is not something that can go down when you're managing the network of electricity. So therefore, you need to be able to find ways to then, still protect the organization, as well as, making sure that, the business is still functional. So when using threat intelligence, we want to be able to ingest and grab everything and put it into a location where we can start to filter and correlate. So what we want to be able to do is not only collect intelligence data from our external sources, whether it be your CTIS, your JCSC, your commercial vendors, your open source threat intelligence vendors that provide that information. You want to also bring in your internal systems and be able to check to see whether there's been any sightings or matches between what's been said happening from the outside. Has it happened are we seeing any evidence of that? We want to normalize that data. We don't want to have multiple points of data. It can be difficult to manage, especially when you're managing multiple sources. but you want to be able to correlate, using your data from your vulnerability scans with network diagrams, understanding where your key assets or your exposed assets are is really really important. And then be able to prioritize that and then translate that into an actionable step for remediation. So when we look at prioritize, how do we do that? So the way that we can do it is, traditionally we've based our prioritization on a couple of things: the CVSS based score, and some of the information that's provided with that, plus our vulnerability management tools, and then temporal scoring system that they have within that product. Whichever one that you use will have some sort of identifying marker to say whether it's important or not. So if you have a look at this table here, I've just got 4 vulnerabilities that I've just grabbed. They had a CVSS 3 base score. We got a 9.8, a 7.8, a 10, and an 8.8. So traditionally speaking, we would go, okay, the first things that we would need to do is prioritize the 9.8 and the 10, because they're the most critical. However, when we start to look at some of the data from threat intelligence, we can see that the 0847 and 41282 have a lower score. However, some of the notes that are coming from threat intelligence is saying that there is an exploit available. There's a proof of concept out there. And so you start to think, okay, well, we may have something that's a 9.8 and a 10. However, if something is exploitable and it fits within our exposed to the internet or it's in a high risk zone, then we can use threat intelligence to gain more information. So we can start to see, is threat, has that exploit been weaponized? So we can see for 41282 it hasn't, but on some of the dark web forums, there could be discussions about it, and someone could be sharing and say, hey, here's a POC that we found on the open web. We can look at this. And if we look at 0847, we can see that it has been weaponized. It's been discussed openly on forums, and we already have a threat actor that's advertised an exploitation toolkit, and can, it's a pay-as-you-go type thing. So really, when we look at it, we can say, based on just this information, we would say, okay, from this information alone, threat intelligence has given us that we should prioritize 0847 and 41282 because they should be patched immediately. They have exploits available. They fall into a high risk. And then the other vulnerabilities that have been identified, we'll continue to monitor those to see if any exploits or any chatter on the dark web has, threat actors are talking about those. And if not, then we'll add them as part of our normal patching cycle from there. So a way to try and sort of prioritize and determine that is through developing a scoring system. And I've got here a user-driven scoring system because it should be very specific to your organization and to the assets that you're protecting. It shouldn't be anything that anybody, a vendor or that says. So, we can look at, and it doesn't have to be complex. It's not, it's not rocket science. You can make it as I prefer the KISS principle of keep it simple. So, we can look at asking these questions. Vulnerability has an exploit. So if it does an exploit available, we can give that an assigned score of 2. And then we can start to accumulate those scores, and we can start to answer these questions. Vulnerability has been weaponized, it has been matched by our internal SIEM or EDR, XDR tools. The threat actor is using the exploit and targeting the industry that you're in. The vulnerability has been exploited in the region that we are in. That's important because you could then start to see and track, is there any patterns? Are they going after this, targeting this particular industry within this region to try and build knowledge about things? Could your organization be the next target? Have any of your industry peers shared any any indicators, anything that could suggest that a threat actor is attempting to exploit that vulnerability? Is it trivial to execute? If it is, that would be a higher score, because then if we start to rule out, APTs or crime gangs, and we could start dealing with, low skilled threat actors that are doing it for, doing it for fun or just to see how far they can push things. And then now with the exploit prediction scoring system, for those who haven't gotten their head around that, is the probability of it being exploited within the next 30 days. If that's a higher percentage, then we want to be able to, have that and raise the priority of that. So it's really bringing your own scoring criteria based on the data that you collect from threat intelligence, whether it be through like I mentioned, CTIS or the JCSC. It could be through some open source, threat intelligence, your CISA in the US, CERT, or your ISAC sharing communities, or your open source threat intelligence feeds that you can get. And then any indicators that you can actually then push those to your EDR, XDR, your WAF, your firewalls. You can proactively take those indicators and say, put a block on any of these IP addresses, these hashes, these DNS, FQDNs, just to be on the safe side from there. And as threat intelligence comes in, it comes in waves. One day an IP address may be malicious, but then in 2 weeks it's been cleaned up and so forth. It becomes okay again. So you can then remove that from there. So a couple of other additional scoring things. You may want to say, if my CVSS base score is above 7, I want to bump up that score, because you don't want to be dealing with everything. If the target country that from your threat intelligence is Australia, or is your target sector is your industry, you want to give that an additional points. If the threat intelligence that you're getting has a confidence of high, a lot of the commercial feeds that you may be using may have a confidence level of high. Is the tracked threat actors that you're following, are they using that exploit? Well, you want to bump that up, because if you're tracking them and they are using it, you could be a potential threat, or it could be on their list. If multiple sources are reporting that vulnerability had been exploited, that could be a combination of your open source, you could be your commercial, and your industry sharing practices. If you got those three all saying the same thing, then that it is something that you need to pay attention to. But then on the flip side, you may see that there are some YARA rules and signatures that you can implement into your IDS IPS. So that means that you can actually reduce that score. And because there is already mitigation practice, it's a workaround. You can bring down that score by however many that you want. So really, it's just about coming up with those particular questions. So just answering the question, where would you declare that the CVE is relevant to our tech stack prior or as part of use of driven scoring system? So I would put it as both. So when the CVE, you're going to know what you want to be able to understand those CVEs, and then how that relates to your technology stack, because 8 out of 10 times those vulnerabilities may not be applicable to you. And then from a scoring perspective, you could say, okay, or if it's say, we use Microsoft, we use, SAP, we use, 40net products, we use Palo Alto, we use all of these. You can start to say, okay, if it is if we use SAP, that is linked to business critical. Therefore, we want to give that a 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever score is relevant for you. Same goes for any of the other vendors that you do. So, weeding out first what's applicable, and then taking what's applicable and driving a score to that is important to help you prioritize that in a way to allow you to focus on what's really important, and get the most critical vulnerabilities patched. So really, there's not much else to it. So when we bring it all together, really, threat intelligence is about bringing context and helping with the prioritization. If you have a threat intelligence platform, that's going to help lighten the workload, but it's not going to stop you from doing things. So, when we talk about ingest and normalize and correlate, a threat intelligence platform will be able to do that automatically. You can then punch in your own scores to your threat intelligence platform to do that automatic scoring for you. You can then also automatically enrich any data that might be, good, bad, or indifferent, and connect those to your firewalls, your IDS, and so forth to put in those blockings. If you don't, that's okay, because you can, spreadsheets, everything's run on spreadsheets. So we can use, create a spreadsheet. As long as it's a repeatable process, then it's going to be consistent. So look for your threat intelligence. Look at the CISA exploited vulnerabilities report, your advisories from ACSC, your NVD database, to see what's around there. As long as you've got your process documented and it's repeatable, then you're able to then demonstrate not only to the business, but also from an auditor's perspective or from a risk perspective, how you've come to that conclusion. And the most important part is, if you're not managing the remediation and you're just focusing on threat intelligence side of things, or you're focused in a different area, collaborate, work with the teams, find out what they need, find out what information they're going to need to allow them to do their job better, and then get from them what you need from them to allow you to do your job better. So with that said, it's a short one. I want to say thank you. If there's any questions that you have, happy to answer any questions. We've got, I'll say this again, if anybody is willing to present on a topic, please let me know. I'm sure most of you are all sick of my voice for the last few weeks or few months. That will, it helps me, but it also allows you to share your knowledge and experience with the community. We've got the website there where I'll post the recording of this session plus the slides. You're welcome to join the Slack group there, or the LinkedIn user group from there. So with that, any questions? So that's a good question. So with Tenable, that is basing it on what they're seeing out there as well. However, what you're trying to do is what's important to Tenable, and what they use may not be applicable to you in your organization. So you've got to be careful that if Tenable says that, or any product that says, hey, this is really, this is really bad, but it's not applicable to your organization, or that particular asset is not, it's way down the stack that it can't be accessed, or it's really difficult, then it's really, you're able to justify it with internal scoring. And that's how I say it, is just being able to justify and not just taking the word of the vendor. You're putting some thought into that, because you know your environment a lot better than anybody else. Does that answer the question? Any other questions? Okay, well, I won't hold you up anymore. If there's anything that you need, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll post on the meetup the link to the website once the recording has been has finished, and I've uploaded it into YouTube. But in the meantime, if there's anything else you need, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.